It took me a while to post this story. I've never shared this story with anyone before, but it's been hard keeping this bottled up. I need to tell someone, so I figured why not do it anonymously over the internet. About 3 years ago, I was looking for work right after graduating my first 2 years of college. The job pool wasn't very motivating. I tried applying at all the average places: Walmart, local video store, GameStop, the mall. I almost even applied at McDonald's. I was desperate for cash. One of my older friends who'd moved to the next city over called me up to chat, and when I told him about how the job hunt was going, he suggested I work for the security firm he'd been working for before the move. Pay is pretty good, and mainly all you gotta do is sit on your ass all night and glance over at cameras every now and again, he told me. They're basically paying you to listen to music and watch Netflix on your phone for 6 hours a night. I wasn't too sure, but I promised him I'd look into it. Not much left, but hey, getting paid more than $15 an hour for barely anything sounded like a pretty good deal. On Monday, I called the number I'd looked up in the paper. I talked to a guy called John Dorner, who was apparently the guy giving out the job. He sounded pleased to hear from me. I got the impression he hadn't gotten many offers to work midnight to 6 a.m. He told me to come down as soon as I could, so I hopped in my car and went. We did the interview in an office downtown with the company's name on it, Lobachek Security. On the phone, John had given the impression of some big jolly Santa type guy, so I was surprised when I came into his office and met this trim young man who couldn't have been any more than his late 20s or early 30s. He looked like the type of guy you'd seen on ESPN broadcast, with a squared jaw, white teeth, commanding eyes, wide shoulders, and carefully combed hair. Anyway, John interviewed me, and it was honestly one of the easiest interviews I've ever had in my life. He had me do a few physical displays, like showing I could do a certain amount of push-ups and stuff without getting winded. All they needed really was a physical from my doctor and to get my background check back, and we'd be done and I'd be good to go. Though there wasn't any danger of either of those things losing me the position, as I told him, it was just formalities. He ran over the details of my position with me and told me basically what the job would entail. I'd be sitting at a security gate all night making sure nobody was breaking in. I'd have to keep an eye on the camera feeds, and every hour or so I'd need to walk the perimeter of the compound to make sure everything was above board. Easy stuff. By 6 a.m. the morning shift would start and the next guy would come and take over. He also fed me the whole spiel about how I was expected to be responsible because I was going to be working under the Lobachek name, and since he was the one hiring me, it'd look bad for him and if I did something wrong and blah 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 blah. Basically the, if you're gonna fuck around on the job, make sure it doesn't come to bite me in the ass talk. With all of that said and done, I got up to leave, and John extended his hand. I took it, and goddamn, his hand was like a catcher's mitt. He shook my hand and looked me in the eye with a huge grin on his face and said, "Welcome to the team." About a week later, once my physical and background check passed, John called me back down to the office to get my security outfit and told me to go down to the compound by 9 p.m. This was so the evening shift guy could give me the rundown on where everything was and what I should do in case of this or that. The compound was just some factory for machine parts, like construction vehicles and tractors and shit like that. When I heard the word compound, I had been imagining some sort of goofy secret lab or something, but I guess not being kidnapped and experimented on was a hell of a lot better. Thing is, the place was a good half an hour drive into the middle of scenic nowhere. I'm talking the boondocks behind the boondocks. I hadn't even seen a farmhouse for more than a mile before I got there. There were no trees, just a few shrubs and some long brush. Everything around the compound was flat dirt, I guess so visibility would be good. I met up with the evening shift guy. Apparently 9 p.m. was when the place closed down for the night, and the last few workers were leaving as I pulled in. Apparently 9 p.m. was when the place closed down for the night, and the last few workers were leaving as I pulled in. I guess he hadn't been expecting me, but he just shrugged. I guess the information hadn't been relayed to him. No big deal. I was used to past bosses not communicating shit well. The guy seemed okay. He didn't look much older than me, maybe 25. I'll call him Seth. And I instantly knew me and him would get along when his first words to me were, "This place has open Wi-Fi," with a smirk on his face. Seth showed me the setup in the guard box, the controls to operate the gate, and the different camera feeds. Then we went out to walk the compound the first time. So, at 9 p.m. the perimeter alarm turns on, and the alarm will go off whenever anything hits the fence. What, like people? Nah, mainly just raccoons, possums, squirrels. Mainly? Yeah, sometimes we'll get a couple of coyotes, maybe a deer every now and then. Nothing to worry about, really. Barbed wire keeps most of the bigger shit from crawling over, like raccoons. Am I gonna need to run out here to chase off raccoons all the time? I asked him. Nah, if you could see it on the camera, that's what's setting off the perimeter alarm, you don't need to bother. I mean, technically we're supposed to, but after you have to run about 300 yards to the northeast corner just to spot a fucking rabbit or something, it gets old pretty quick. If I can spot it on the camera, I just leave it alone. I haven't had any problems so far. Never had anybody actually try getting in? Dude, we're out in the middle of Bumblefuck County guarding a place where they build farm equipment. Not really anything worthwhile for someone to come in and steal. He stopped for a second and then added, "Oh, and Sawyer." Sawyer? He's the guard cat, Seth said. One of the guys who used to run security here found him out in the yard one night and brought him back. He's basically everyone's pet here. He might set off the alarm once or twice a week if he's going after a field mouse or something. I just let him come and go. Nobody really cares. We walked around the rest of the compound, and Seth showed me where every camera was. It was a decent size, taking us a little more than 10 minutes to make our way back around the factory to the guard box at the front gate. Seth told me that all I really needed to do when I came out every couple of hours was to make sure that nobody was in here, and to make sure there were no breaches in the fence where someone might be able to get in. Basically, just go for a little walk every now and then. Get some fresh air, he joked. Seth and I sat in the guard box for the next couple of hours until his shift ended and mine began. Shooting the shit. At one point, a scruffy-looking brown cat came waltzing in and brushed up against my legs. I reached down to pet him, and that's when I noticed it had something in its mouth, and I drew my hand back so fast I almost hit myself in the face. "Looks like Tom Sawyer brought you a little welcoming gift," Seth laughed. It was the biggest fucking rat I'd ever seen in my life. Like, this thing could probably pass off as a chinchilla in the right light. What was worse is that it wasn't dead. Sawyer had ripped the thing open from the throat to the crotch where he had it in his fangs, and its guts were hanging out, but the rat was still squirming weakly in his mouth. I was glad that I hadn't just eaten dinner. Seth grabbed Sawyer by the scruff of his neck like a mother cat and gave him a little shake over the trash bin until he dropped the mutilated creature into the garbage, and then he stepped outside and pitched it over the fence into the dirt. When he came in and sat back down and saw my disgusted face, he smiled. Sawyer will do that from time to time. He brings you little presents like that to show he likes you. Just toss them. Something will come by later and get it. He scratched the cat between the ears and it cuddled up next to his feet, looking up at me, almost like it was waiting for me to say thank you. About an hour later, Seth finally left, and I was on my own with Sawyer as my only companion for the next 6 hours. Now, I'm sure this is the part where you'd expect for shit to suddenly hit the fan. Well, sorry to disappoint, but it didn't. Everything went fine. In fact, the alarm never even went off that night. For the next week, it was like that. I'd sit in my box watching videos on my phone, or texting, whatever, and Sawyer would either be curled up near my feet, out hunting, or just wandering in general. The perimeter alarm was set off a few times, but it was only ever a squirrel or a possum like Seth had said, or Sawyer prowling around. Sawyer was even kind enough to bring me one of the squirrels one night, gutted just like the rat he'd brought me the first night, and I petted him on the head and tossed it over the fence just like Seth had. Seth had been right. Some animals came at some point and took the remains away when I wasn't paying attention. It went on like this for about another week. That's when shit started getting kinda weird. One night I was sitting in the guard box, playing Angry Birds, when the alarm went off from the southwest fence. I looked at the camera, but I couldn't see anything. I gave it a couple of minutes, but when nothing popped up on the feed that could have set off the alarm, I grumbled and got to my feet, clicked on my flashlight, and stepped out to go and check it out. "Sawyer, you keep an eye out for anything suspicious," I joked as I left the box. Sawyer just raised his head and gave me a smug cat look, as if to say, "I'm the only one who does any real work around here." It was pitch goddamn black out there in the yard surrounding the compound. It was cloudy that night, so there was no light from the moon. There were lampposts along the fence, but they were so few and far between that I'd been walking in total darkness for a good 2 minutes before reaching the next one. I waved my flashlight around slowly, not wanting to wind up getting attacked by a raccoon or something by tripping over it in the dark. That's when I heard it. The fence rattled in the dark, like something was climbing on it. I waved my flashlight along it, and came to the part of the fence that was still shaking back and forth. There was nothing there. I scanned the dark portion of the yard with a wide swipe of my light, but whatever had been on the fence must have dodged the fuck out of there when it heard me coming. I shrugged, muttered, "Fucking raccoons," and turned to head back to the guard box. That's when something else caught my ear. A really low, soft growl. It sounded kind of like a dog, but it didn't have quite the right inflection. It sounded kind of like someone pretending to be a dog. Either way, I nearly pissed my fucking drawers and whipped around, holding the flashlight in front of me and shined it along the fence. The light went pretty far, but it didn't matter. Whatever it was hiding out in the brush about 10 yards from the fence. So, naturally, I bent over and picked up a rock from the ground and chucked it as hard as I could in the direction I thought the noise had come from. Whatever it was must have gotten spooked, because I could hear something go crashing through the brush away from the fence and into the night. I shuddered a bit, backing away a few steps from the fence, and then I felt like a huge pussy. Seth had told me there were coyotes that came around here sometimes. I'd even heard them whining out there in the fields a few times the past week. What the hell was I afraid of? Coyotes were super scared of people, and besides, I had a huge chain link fence separating it from me. I sighed and smirked at my own cowardness, and then turned and headed back to the guard box. The one thing I couldn't get out of my mind, though, was a single thought. Could coyotes climb fences? The next few nights were pretty uneventful. Sawyer brought me a young baby rabbit whose head he'd ripped off, and I pitched it over the fence like always. Then Thursday night rolled around. It had to be around 2 a.m. when the alarm jolted me awake. I guess I'd leaned back in my chair and dozed off for a little while. I looked at the camera, and for a change, I could actually see a coyote this time, pressed up against the fence on the east side. I sat there and watched it for a minute, but it didn't seem like it planned on moving anytime soon. I wasn't about to sit there and listen to this freaking high-pitched buzzing until the dumb animal decided it was gonna fuck off back into the field, so I took my flashlight and headed out. But almost as soon as I had left my box, the alarm shut off. I stopped and looked back. I went back into the box and looked at the feed, and the coyote was gone. Lucky me, or so I'd thought, until I heard a high-pitched animal shriek from outside. It sounded like a dog, howling in pain. Sawyer immediately sat up and backed into a corner, letting off a low, agitated sound. He didn't like that sound. This cat had slept through pretty much every alarm since I'd started this job, but this sound made his fur stand on end, and he scrunched himself up in the far corner of the guard box. I'd guessed it must be the coyote. I figured maybe it was fighting with another member of its pack, but then it just kept on going and going, and it was even worse than the alarm. I couldn't see anything on the feed, so I figured I'd head out and yell at them and toss a few rocks until they left, and I could get some peace and quiet. I wish I hadn't. As I made my way out to the east fence, the wailing became more and more piercing, almost agonizing. When I was drawing up within about 20 yards from the point in the fence, it suddenly dropped almost dead quiet. It was like someone had hit a mute button. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I knew the thing must have died, but my mouth was suddenly really dry, and my entire body tensed up for a second. I scanned along the fence, and my light illuminated 2 small orbs near the brush. My culprit. "Go on, get out of here," I shouted. It didn't move an inch. I bent over, picked up a few rocks, and chucked them all at the animal. Something ran away in the brush, but the coyote's eyes were still staring back at me. I squinted and approached the fence closer, getting right up on it until my nose was practically touching the metal. That was a mistake. I wasn't looking at a coyote, not a full one anyway. The top half of it was lying on the dirt around the fence, looking directly at me, but at its midsection, it just ended. Its intestines were trailing behind its top half, back to the edge of the brush, disappearing into the tall grass. I fucking gagged. I stumbled back and turned my eyes away, not wanting to look anymore, but not being able to help myself. It was like morbid curiosity. I trailed my flashlight down, and I could see drag marks in the dirt leading from the fence. Something had grabbed this animal, dragged it away from the fence, and begun tearing into it about halfway to the grass. If the trail of blood was any indication, I had heard the coyotes were cannibalistic, but this was not what I had been expecting to find. This wasn't just some dominance dispute, it was brutal. That's when I heard a very soft whimper and looked back at the coyote. It was still fucking alive. I don't know how, given that practically all of its insides were outside now, but it was lying there, weakly pawing at the ground, like it was still trying to get back to the perceived safety of the fence. It dragged its entrails behind it as it inched forward. I covered my mouth. I didn't want to watch. Seeing anything in pain like this was just wrong in my mind, but it was so surreal I couldn't help myself. It reminded me of the animals Sawyer always brought in. All at once, I heard a snarl, and the coyote's intestines went taut, and I watched in abject horror as the rest of the animal was dragged by its own living guts back into the brush, disappearing completely from view. Then it was quiet. There was no final yelp, no growl or movement. Everything was just still and quiet. Fuck that, I said out loud, and turned abruptly and jogged my ass back to the guard box. I came back in, and Sawyer was still scrunched up in the corner. I sat down and swiveled my chair to face out of the box. There was no door. I just stared outside, along the southern fence, along the spaced-out lamp post, all the way to the eastern corner, disappearing along the side of the factory. I didn't feel safe. I looked over at Sawyer, and I guess I was maybe trying to cope with the fucked up shit I'd just seen, but I said to him, $15 an hour ain't enough to deal with the fucking werewolves or chupacabras or whatever that shit was, man. Sawyer looked up at me and let out the same agitated noise he made earlier, as if he was agreeing with me. I didn't get back on my phone for the rest of the night. Sawyer and I just sat there in the back of the guard box, staring out into the dark. The alarm didn't go off again. Once the morning guy showed up to take over, I told him what had happened last night. He went with me to see. The blood was fucking gone. It was like someone had came by and just sucked it up with a carpet shampooer or some shit. I swore up and down that what I was saying was the truth, but the guy just told me that I must have had a nightmare, and that he'd let it slide and wouldn't tell the boss I was falling asleep on the job, but not to let it happen again. That night, I told Seth about what had happened, and he also didn't sound very impressed. Dude, I mean, we do got cougars around these parts. It's just nature being nature, he said, not really focusing on me and scratching Sawyer's back. I'm telling you, it was like something out of a fucking horror movie, I stammered, taking a quick glance over my shoulder. It just dragged into the darkness, and that was it, and they were never heard from again type shit. You've got Mace, Seth said. You think Mace is gonna stop a mountain lion? I mean, are you sure you didn't fall asleep? I didn't fucking fall asleep! I was getting pretty pissed off. Okay, I just mean, what the hell happened with all the blood you said you saw then? I don't fucking know. It was like someone had come by and swept away all the blood-stained dirt along the fence, along with any evidence my story had. I don't know, dude. Something just isn't sitting right with me. I'm not sure I want to keep doing this shit. Damn, don't quit just because some coyotes were getting antsy, Seth said, putting Sawyer down. Look, what if I stick around for a little while with you? If any weird shit happens, then I'll be able to back you up on it. Won't you get in trouble for that? I asked. Seth just shrugged. As far as I'm concerned, if I ain't on company time and you're here, what the fuck are they gonna complain about? Seth stuck around for about 3 hours. Absolutely nothing happened. About 2:45, Sawyer came waltzing into the guard box with a half-dead squirrel. Seth pitched it over the fence like usual. We went out a few minutes later to walk the perimeter again, and when we got back to the guard box, Seth finally decided he'd had enough. I couldn't blame him now. Now I looked like I was just being a huge baby. But that's when we noticed Sawyer scrunched up into the back of the guard box, making that low grumbling noise he'd made the other night with the coyote. "What's wrong with you, Tom Sawyer?" Seth asked, bending down to pet the cat. "Is old Injun Joe out there killing coyotes?" Tom bit Seth on the hand and then fled out of the guard box. "Ow, what was that for?" he cried, grabbing his hand. "Stupid cat, the fuck's wrong with him?" "He was acting this way the other night too," I said, now on full alert for any sounds. We stood there in the guard box, me scanning the darkness, and Seth taking care of his hand with the first aid kit. When the alarm went off, my heart practically jumped into my throat. "See anything on the cameras?" I asked, not willing to look away from the door. Seth didn't say anything for a second, and then I heard him mutter, "What the hell?" I glanced over my shoulder, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Seth stood up. "Come on," he said, walking out of the box. I followed behind him. As I stepped out of the guard box, something squishy crunched beneath my foot. I looked down. "Ugh, it's that fucking squirrel," I said, dragging my foot through the dirt. "I thought you pitched that thing over the fence." "I did. Sawyer must have brought it back in." We went all the way to the northern fence in the very back of the compound. I asked Seth what he had seen, but he just told me to keep quiet. We were coming up on the northwest corner when Seth stopped, shining his flashlight on the fence. My stomach turned over. The fence had been peeled back near the top, like something big had crashed into it and bent the links out of place. There was a bit of blood on the fence. Whatever it was hadn't quite cleared the barbed wire. "Seth, what the fuck?" I asked, getting increasingly uneasy. He shined his light along the ground. There was a trail of speckles of blood going along the ground and around the western side of the compound. Not a disemboweled corpse being dragged trail, but more like a stabbed teenager fleeing from Jason. "We need to find out what the fuck is in here," he whispered, his voice quavering. Before I could say anything, he began walking down and around the corner. We walked down the western fence in silence, straining our eyes and ears to hear anything. Seth was keeping his flashlight ahead of us, pointed at the ground so we could see the trail, when we heard a loud huffing sound. Seth nearly jumped out of his skin and swung the flashlight around frantically, giving us flashes of something in the dark about 20 feet ahead of us. I raised my own flashlight to look into the terrified eyes of a young buck. "Jesus Christ," Seth wheezed. I breathed a sigh of relief. It was a goddamn deer. I almost wanted to laugh, until I started taking in the whole animal. The buck's neck had been slit open. A large chunk of its throat was simply hanging out of its body, and blood was slowly dripping from the wound, pooling on the ground at its feet. Its legs and stomach were all cut up too, probably from the barbed wire. "Jesus fucking Christ," Seth wheezed again. "Something attacked it," I whispered. "It tried to make it over the fence. It thought it'd be safe here. Gotta be a mountain lion," he whispered, now just as on edge as me. "Coyote couldn't do that. Not to a good-sized buck." Suddenly, the animal froze, its breathing stopped, and its ears swiveled back and forth. It turned sharply and bounded right past us over the fence again, getting its back legs caught in the barbed wire and ripping a portion of it down off the fence. It kicked frantically until it freed its back legs and charged off into the dark. We both looked at one another, and then walked down the western fence the rest of the way back to the guard box. But the night wasn't over yet. We got back to the box and Seth sat down in the chair. I stood with my back against the far wall, looking out the doorway. The squirrel was gone. I guess Sawyer must have taken it. "Dude, this isn't what I was told the job would be like. Nobody said anything about fucking mountain lions," I said in a hushed tone. I don't know if I was afraid something would hear me or what. "This kind of shit never happened on my watch," Seth said. "I've never even seen any cougars out here. Why the fuck wouldn't they give us a gun or something?" I was kinda pissed off. What the fuck was Mace gonna do to a mountain lion? Piss it off even more while it mauled us to death? "I'm fucking calling John," I said finally, taking out my phone. "John?" Seth tilted his head a bit. Yeah, this job isn't worth having to tussle with a fucking mountain lion. Who's John? John, you know, that manager guy or whatever you call him. He never told me anything about fucking mountain lions. I hit John in the contacts and held the phone up to my ear. We're sorry. The number you have dialed is either disconnected or is no longer in service. You're fucking kidding me. I almost threw my fucking phone outside. What the fuck, John? Dude, there's nobody named John that works with us, Seth piped up. It's me in the evening, you from midnight, Tony on the morning shift and Michael on the afternoon. The guy who runs this shit is named Jeremy. No, I said adamantly. John is the one who interviewed me. He's the one that hired me, John Dorner. I'm telling you, there's no John Dorner working with us, Seth said. I don't know who the hell you talk to, but they definitely aren't with Canteen Security. Canteen? Yes. Something wasn't right. That was obvious. My pulse started to quicken, my throat was dry, and I began to sweat. Not Labachek Security? Laba what? We work with Canteen Security, man. Jeremy Canteen, Seth said. Never even heard of what you're talking about. I tried my phone again. I put in John's number myself this time. Still the same message. We're sorry. The number you have dialed is either disconnected or is no longer in service. I looked down at my phone. My mind was a total blank. I slowly looked up at Seth. Then who was I? The sound was so sudden and ear-splitting that I dropped my damn phone and Seth nearly fell out of his chair. Somewhere outside of the front gate, a cat was screaming. Jesus Christ, Sawyer, Seth yelled, scrambling to his feet and leading outside. Hit the gate, he said, and rounded the outside of the guard box. The gate slid open, and Seth went out about halfway to the brush with his flashlight, scanning for Sawyer. Suddenly, the noise stopped. I couldn't hear anything but my own racing pulse beating in my ears. Seth called out to Sawyer, trying to call him in, but there was nothing. After a minute, he began to slowly back up to the gate. That's when I saw something out of the corner of my eye come flying out of the grass. It smashed into the window with a loud bang only a few feet from Seth, and he shouted and stumbled backward. If I hadn't been leaning against the wall, I'd have tripped up too. There was a trickle of blood running down the front of the window. I called out to Seth, and all I heard was a sob in response. I cautiously made my way out and crept around the back of the guard box and came up behind Seth. He was frozen, looking over at what had hit the window. I'm sure you can guess what it was. I don't want to go into detail. Fuck this, Seth shouted, frantically clawing up to his feet and sprinting for his car. I didn't need any encouragement to follow him. He wrestled with his keys for a moment, and I urged him to hurry up, looking all around us listening. When the grass a few yards away began to rustle, I swear to God I thought I was going to faint. Seth got his door open, jumped in and slammed it shut, unlocked my side, and I did the same. He put the keys in the ignition and... nothing. What the fuck? He shouted, slamming his fist on the wheel. What the fuck? Something rushed from the grass and slammed up against the car. We both screamed, and screamed even louder when I saw what it was. There, staring at me from Seth's window, was the guy I'd known as John Dorner. This time, however, his eyes were a maniac bloodshot, and his hair was a wild mess. He was caked in a bit of fur, blood, and gore. His teeth were coated in dried blood, and drool was running down his face. He was breathing hard, fogging up the window. He tapped on the window with a blood-clotted knife he had in his hand, and then let out a joyful, depraved sounded sigh that turned into a giggle. It's John, he breathed in a sing-song tone. Here to check on you. Neither of us could speak. I couldn't breathe. John crouched down and made his way over the near guard box, crawling on all fours like a wacko fucking Tarzan. I didn't want to turn around. I could see what he was doing in the rearview mirror though. He was eating. Oh, Jesus Christ. He came back over, carrying Sawyer. He mashed him against the window and smeared it all over, then started licking the window clean. So good, he gasped. Best thing I've eaten all night. Seth was crying. I'm pretty sure I was too. I can't really remember what happened after that. I think my mind might have temporarily just shut off. What I can recall, the guy just sort of vanished back into the brush. Seth and I sat in his car for the next 3 hours. We didn't talk. We didn't move a single muscle. We were too afraid that he would come back. When Tony, the morning guy, came to relieve me, he found us both completely freaked out of our minds. We called the cops. They looked around the area and the fields surrounding the compound. Other than finding dozens of mutilated animal corpses, there was no sign of this supposed crazy mystery man. Tony thought we'd been up all night doing drugs. When everything came to light, turns out I'd never actually been hired by anyone. Nobody, I guess, brought me starting up here to that canteen guy. And when he heard my name, he'd said he'd never spoken to me before in my life. The police reviewed the security tapes, but the tapes cut out before 3 a.m. It seemed as though frayed wire was to blame. Just poor wiring, they said. Just poor wiring. The police told me that John Dorner was the name of a man who had died in the 1960s. There was no such business as Lobachek Security, and when the police investigated the office I'd visited, it was registered as having been on the market for more than 4 years. Not a single trace was left that this guy even existed. The police said to call them if anything else were to happen, but they literally had nothing but the word of 2 mentally unstable 20-somethings to go on, and it seemed pretty clear that they really didn't believe us. I tried calling my friend who told me about the job, but he never answered any of my calls or messages. I haven't heard from him since. Seth quit after that night. I would have too, had I actually been working there. For more than a month after that, I didn't sleep through the night. I barely slept at all. Every single noise I heard was not John. Every single electronic noise was the alarm from the fence, telling me he'd come back to get me. For about a year after that, Seth and I kept in touch, calling one another now and again, then even less frequently. Then for over a year we didn't speak at all. I don't think either of us really wanted to be reminded of that night. I've chosen you to tell this story because last week I got a voice message from Seth's number. Only, there wasn't a message, just noises, like someone chewing with their mouth open. Hey guys, thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. So first off guys, apology if this is uploaded today and not yesterday. Yesterday was just so freaking crazy. First off, it was more of my fault for picking such a really long story. I thought I was going to breeze through it, it was going to be done. Instead, there was like 2 hours of just unedited and bloopers, and it was just really crazy. I know some of you were probably like 2 hours of bloopers. Could I see that? I deleted it all already, and besides, whenever there are bloopers or whenever I screw up, I curse a lot, and I mean like a lot. It won't be the faint of heart, that's all I'm saying. Whenever I mess up, it's not good. I'm very critical on myself, and yeah, let's just say it's not good. Plus, I also had to help out my cousin with some baby stuff. Him and his girlfriend are expecting their first kid soon. And then I had to help out my other friend. And then on top of that, on top of all of that crazy stuff, my friend Charlie called me up and he's like, "Yo, dude, you got the new King of Fighters game? I want to play it. Can I come over?" And at this point, I'm just like, man, really? Today of all things? But anyways, guys, again, I apologize for this being uploaded today and not yesterday. Please forgive me. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. And just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.